Spilling red wine on a man's suit in Montreal usually ended with the kind of apology that required a lawyer present. Spilling an entire bottle of Chateau Petrus on the lap of the most feared crime lord in Quebec usually ended with someone disappearing into the St. Lawrence River. Augustin Voss did neither. He simply looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his $4,000 Zegna trousers, then slowly up at the woman who had done it, and said nothing at all. That was somehow worse. The woman responsible was Faye Okafor, 26 years old, 280 pounds of soft brown skin, and absolute mortification. She'd been working banquet service at the Hôtel Le Beaux-Arts for 11 days. She had broken 2 champagne flutes, knocked a centerpiece into a senator's soup, and was currently in the process of setting a new personal record. "Oh my God," Faye whispered. The empty bottle was still in her hand, tilted at a 45-degree angle like evidence at a crime scene. "Oh my God, I am so, stop!" His voice was low, not loud. People who needed to be loud, Augustin Voss had decided long ago, hadn't yet learned how to be frightening. Faye stopped. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair, and the kind of face that had probably been brutally handsome once and had since become something more unsettling. Sharp jaw, pale grey eyes, hands resting perfectly still on the table. He wore his ruined suit the way a glacier wears weather, unmoved. Around him, 5 men in dark jackets went very, very still. One of them, a mountain of a man named Edouard, the underboss, though Faye didn't know that yet, leaned forward slightly, his hand moving toward his jacket. Augustin raised 2 fingers. Just 2. Edouard stopped. "Your name," Augustin said, looking at Faye. "Faye," she managed. "Faye Okafor. I work here." Obviously, with the wine. "That is now on your—" She made a small, helpless gesture toward his lap. "I will pay for that. I will absolutely pay for that. It'll take me approximately 4 years on my current salary, but I will make a payment plan and I will honor it." Something moved in Augustin Voss's grey eyes. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't anger. It was something much stranger. Attention. "Bring me another bottle," he said. "And a cloth." "Yes," Faye said. "Yes, absolutely, right away, I'm so." "Go," she went. From across the private dining room, the hotel's banquet manager, a thin, perpetually sweating man named Gilles, watched the whole exchange from the service door with the color completely drained from his face. He grabbed Faye's arm the moment she cleared the threshold. "Do you know who that is?" he hissed. "A very upset man with very expensive trousers." Gilles made a sound like a kettle about to fail. "That is Augustin Voss. He owns half the shipping infrastructure between Montreal and Halifax. He has dinner here 4 times a year, and we do not. Faye, we do not make mistakes with that table." Faye stared at him. "I thought he was a logistics guy?" Jill's eyes went somewhere complicated. "He is a great many things. Get the Merlot, the 2017. Do not drop it. Do not trip. Do not speak unless spoken to. And for the love of everything, do not apologize again." Faye got the Merlot. She did not trip. She did, however, catch her heel on the small lip of the service threshold on her way back in, stumble sideways with the grace of a shopping cart with a broken wheel, and grab the nearest stable object to right herself. The nearest stable object was Edouard's shoulder. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. "Sorry," Faye whispered. She straightened, smoothed her apron, walked to the table, and poured the wine with hands that were only shaking a moderate amount. Augustin Voss watched her the entire time. She didn't notice until she was walking away, and then she wished she hadn't noticed at all, because his gaze felt like a hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades. Not aggressive, just present, deliberate. She made it back to the service corridor and pressed herself against the wall. Edouard appeared at the private dining room door, looked around until he found her, and crossed the room with the easy certainty of a man who'd never had to hurry in his life. "He wants to know," Edouard said, stopping in front of her, "if you've worked here long, 11 days. He wants to know if you're looking for other work." Faye blinked. I just ruined his suit. Yes, I grabbed your shoulder. I'm aware. I can list at least 3 other things I did wrong tonight, if that would help contextualize. Miss Okafor. Edward looked at her with the flat patience of a man who had survived many things and found this conversation moderately less dangerous than most of them. He's asking if you need a job. His executive assistant quit this morning. He has a meeting in 4 days that requires someone competent with scheduling, filing, and discretion. Jill says your filing system is the only organized thing in the hotel's storage room. You reorganized it on your 3rd day without being asked. Faye had reorganized it because the chaos had been causing her physical distress. What does the job pay? She heard herself ask. Edward told her. She thought about her mother's medical bills. She thought about the 1-bedroom she shared with her cousin in Rosemont, because rent in this city had become genuinely unhinged. She thought about the student debt that sent her polite automated reminders every Tuesday like a friend who would never, ever drop the subject. I'll need the salary in writing, Faye said, and benefits. And I have to give Jill 2 weeks' notice because it's the right thing to do even though he sweats directly onto people. Edward blinked. Just once. I'll let him know. The office of Voss Maritime Consulting occupied the top 2 floors of a glass building on Rue McGill, which Faye learned was a significant address in the way that certain addresses in Montreal were significant, not because of what was visible, but because of what wasn't. The lobby was marble and restraint. The elevator required a keycard. The receptionist looked like she'd been hired specifically to make other people feel underdressed. Faye was underdressed. Her blazer was a deep burgundy and stretched a little across the shoulders, and she'd bought it from a consignment shop on Saint Laurent, and she thought it looked nice actually, but it did not look like this building. She was met on the 23rd floor by a woman named Sylvette, who was Augustin's outgoing assistant, and who had the specific energy of someone who had survived a war and was leaving before the next one started. He doesn't like noise, Sylvette said, walking her through the office at speed. He doesn't like inefficiency. He doesn't like when people ask questions they could have answered themselves. He checks his messages at 6 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. You do not interrupt meetings unless the building is structurally compromised. His coffee is dark roast, no sugar, no milk, and if it's been sitting for more than 8 minutes, he will know. How will he know? He will know. Sylvette handed her a binder, his schedule for the week. His calendar, access password, is in the front. The filing system is on the shared drive, but it hasn't been touched since my predecessor left, and it's a disaster. Faye opened the binder. Her fingers twitched. I can fix the filing system, she said. Sylvette looked at her the way one exhausted person looks at another who is clearly about to volunteer for the harder version of something. It's 417 misfiled documents. I can fix the filing system. Faye repeated. On her first morning, Faye reorganized 43 folders, cross-referenced 3 years of shipping manifests, and discovered that someone had been mislabeling international freight accounts in a way that made $200,000 in undeclared income look like a rounding error. She flagged it in a note and left it on Augustin's desk with the coffee, which she delivered at precisely the correct temperature because she had timed it from the kitchen and walked at a pace that covered the distance in under 2 minutes. Augustin arrived at 8:15, sat down, picked up the coffee, and read the note without expression. He looked up. You found this today, he said. The filing system was... Faye began. You've been here 4 hours. The mislabeling pattern was consistent. Once I saw it in the first folder, it was easy to... Faye, she stopped. Who told you to look at the freight accounts? No one. I was just filing and the numbers didn't. She paused. Read his expression. Is this a problem? I can unfind it. I mean, I can't actually unfind it. I've already found it. But I can pretend I didn't if that's... It's not a problem. His voice had shifted slightly. Not warmer. Just less. architecturally cold. It's a problem for the person who created it. He went back to his coffee. Faye went back to the filing system. By the end of the first week, the office had developed a specific kind of ambient tension. Not the sharp, bracing tension of something about to break, more the taut, weather system tension of something trying very hard to understand what it was looking at. The men who worked the floors below, men with names like Pierrot and Mathieu, and a particularly quiet individual everyone called Saint Jean, who Faye had decided not to think too carefully about, had initially treated her arrival with the flat, dismissive skepticism they reserved for anything that disrupted established patterns. She was too big, too loud in her apologizing, too prone to wandering into the wrong corridor while looking for the printer. She had walked into a room on Wednesday that she very quickly understood she should not have walked into, announced, "Oh, sorry, I'm looking for the recycling bin, does anyone know?" and then walked back out without completing the sentence because the expression on the face of the man being questioned at the table had communicated something she preferred not to examine. She found the recycling bin. She said nothing about the room. Edouard had watched the whole thing from the hallway. "You're not curious," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm extremely curious," Faye said, dropping her paper in the bin. "I'm also from Scarborough. I know when to be curious quietly." Edouard looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back to his phone without another word. But the next morning, someone had put a proper recycling sign on the correct door. The cannolis started on the 8th day. Not cannolis, technically. This was Montreal, so it was a box of pasties de nata from a Portuguese bakery on Duluth that Faye had mentioned in passing on the phone to her cousin the previous Thursday, not knowing Augustin was standing 12 feet away, and that the man retained information the way certain rocks retain heat. She found the box on her desk. No note. She looked at it. She looked at Edouard, who was pretending to read something. "No idea," said Edouard. The box was there every morning for the next 2 weeks. Faye understood something then that made her slightly afraid, not of Augustin Voss, but of herself. Because when a man running what she was now fairly certain was one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. East of Toronto started quietly making sure she had Portuguese custard tarts every morning, the correct response was probably to submit her 2 weeks' notice, not to start trying to figure out what pastry he liked, so she could leave something on his desk in return. She found out he liked tarte au sucre. She left one with his coffee on a Tuesday. He didn't say anything. The folder she'd left it on had been moved 4 inches to the right to make room for it. She noticed because she noticed everything. The thing about Augustin Voss's world was that it didn't crash into Faye's so much as gradually, politely, and then very suddenly reveal itself. She had constructed a working theory in her head by week 3. The theory was, Voss Maritime Consulting was a legitimate business with some peripheral activities she had decided were not her business. It was a comfortable theory. It allowed her to schedule his meetings, manage his correspondence, and reorganize his entire digital archive without asking herself too many questions. The theory collapsed on a Thursday afternoon in March, when Faye was carrying a stack of contracts to the boardroom and took the wrong elevator by accident. The private one, requiring Augustin's keycard, which he'd handed to her that morning without explanation, and stepped out into a basement level that was absolutely not on the building directory. She stood in the elevator door, looking at the room. The room looked back. There were men she recognized from the upper floors. There were men she didn't recognize. There were things on the tables she was going to firmly decide she hadn't seen. And at the far end there was Augustin in his shirt sleeves, speaking very quietly to a man who had the posture of someone receiving extremely bad news. Augustin looked up. Their eyes met across the length of the room. Faye looked down at her contracts. She looked back up. "I took the wrong elevator," she said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "Yes," said Augustin. "I'm going to take the correct one now." Yes, she stepped back. The doors closed. She delivered the contracts. She sat down at her desk. She picked up a pen and held it for approximately 90 seconds, and then she put it down and started updating the Q2 calendar because the alternative was sitting with the full weight of what she'd just seen, and she was not ready to do that in a public space. Augustin appeared in her office doorway 40 minutes later. "Are you going to quit?" he asked. Genuinely asking. Faye looked at the screen. "My mother's dialysis treatments cost $4,000 a month, and my salary here covers that with enough left to start actually paying down the debt that used to keep me up at night. So," she minimized the calendar. "No." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "If you want to know, I don't," Faye said, and then, because honesty had always been a character flaw she hadn't managed to correct, "I know enough. I'm good at not knowing more than I need to." Something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like relief. "Your filing," he said, "is exceptional." "I know," said Faye. He almost smiled. It looked like a man trying to remember how, more than was professionally appropriate. It was a Wednesday evening in April when Faye made the mistake of leaving the building alone. Augustin was in back-to-back meetings with people from Toronto who'd arrived with the energy of people who believed they had leverage they didn't quite have yet. Eduard was on the phone. The lobby security had changed shift, and the new guard didn't know her face yet. She'd been in the building for 11 hours, and she needed air, and there was a poutine plout since 2 blocks down. She made it 1. She made it 1 block. The van was white, which she registered distantly as the wrong color for something ominous, but apparently no one had informed the 3 men who climbed out of it. They were professionals, or near enough, fast, coordinated. One came from the left and one from the right, and the third caught her before she could do more than open her mouth, a gloved hand pressing hard over her face, and she fought. She was 280 pounds, and she fought with everything she had. But 3 to 1 was 3 to 1, and her vision went grey and then dark. She woke up cold, concrete floor, high windows showing black sky, the smell of the St. Lawrence somewhere underneath the smell of old oil and rust. Her wrists were bound behind her back with zip ties that were doing their job extremely well. "Good," said a voice. "You're awake." The man standing across the warehouse from her was compact and expensively dressed in the way of someone who'd acquired money recently and was still audible about it. He had the smile of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. His name, she would learn, was Cassian Morel. He ran an operation out of Toronto that had been trying to establish a foothold in Montreal for 2 years and failing because Augustin Voss controlled the infrastructure and Cassian Morel controlled approximately none of it. "You work for Voss," Cassian said, crouching down to her level in a way that he probably thought was intimidating. "I'm his executive assistant," Faye said. Her voice came out remarkably even. "I do his scheduling. You're the woman he's been," Cassian paused, seemed to find the right word, attentive about. "I couldn't say. I manage his calendar. He doesn't discuss his attentiveness with me." Cassian studied her. His eyes moved over her in the way she recognized, the quick inventory, the wait first, the rest of her second. "I have to say, you're not what I expected. People say that a lot," Faye said. "It stops bothering you." Something flickered in his face. He stood up. "I'm going to call him. You're going to confirm you're here and that you're unharmed. And then Augustin Voss is going to understand that this city has 2 power structures now, not 1. "He won't negotiate," Faye said. "That's not a threat. I'm just telling you. I've been in his meetings. He doesn't negotiate from a position he sees as weakness. He doesn't have a choice." Faye looked around the warehouse while Cassian dialed. There were 4 men she could see, possibly more in the shadows. There was one man closer to her than the others, young, bored, holding his phone in a way that suggested he'd rather be somewhere else. There was a structural support column 8 feet to her left, There was, roughly 2 feet in front of her, a wooden pallet that had been left on its side. There was also the fact that she'd been testing the tensile limits of the zip tie for the last 4 minutes, while maintaining steady eye contact with Cassian Morel, and her left thumb was almost through. Cassian put the call on speaker. It rang twice. When Augustin answered, the sound of his voice in that cold space did something complicated to the air quality. Morel, a pause. Just long enough. Where is she? She's here. She's fine. Cassian tilted the phone toward her. Augustin, Faye said clearly. I'm in what I think is a waterfront warehouse, south side of the port based on the smell. I'm fine. I should have stayed in the building, and I'm sorry about that. Also, I think your Q2 stakeholder meeting conflict site visit on the 15th, I meant to flag that before I left. Silence on the line. Then, I see it. His voice had changed. Not softer, something else. I'll move the Laval visit. Cassian stepped forward, touching. Here's what's going to happen. Morel. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 2 degrees from the speaker alone. The only decision you get to make right now is how long it takes me to get there. That's it. That's all you have. I have 30 men. You had 30 men. I've been moving since her tracker lost signal. Another pause. You have about 6 minutes. Cassian went very still. Faye moved. She had been calculating the angle for 3 minutes. Her left hand was almost free. She threw her full weight backward with everything she had, hitting the concrete floor hard enough to rattle her teeth. But the impact also cracked the crossbar of the wooden pallet behind her, and the zip tie, already compromised, snapped against the broken wood. Her hands came free. The young guard who'd been standing nearest wheeled around. Faye grabbed the broken pallet crossbar, rough wood, maybe 2 feet long, scrambled to her feet with the ungainliness of a woman who was 280 pounds and had just hit concrete and did not care even slightly about looking graceful. And when the guard lunged for her, she swung the crossbar sideways with both hands and both arms, and 3 weeks of frustration and fear and the specific fury of a woman from Scarborough who had worked too hard for too long to end up zip-tied in a warehouse. The crossbar caught him across the knees. He went down hard. Faye ran. Not elegantly. She was not built for elegant. She ran with her whole body, feet pounding the concrete, and when one of Cassian's other men moved to intercept her, she ducked left on pure instinct, and the man's hands closed on air, and she hit the warehouse wall, and there was a door, a side door, unlocked, because no one had thought to lock it, and she was through it and into the cold April air of the waterfront. Before anyone had fully processed what had happened, she made it 40 feet. Then the lights of 3 black SUVs came around the corner of the building like something out of a film, and Edouard was out of the first one before it fully stopped, and then Augustin was out of the second, and he crossed the distance between them in a way that had nothing to do with his usual controlled, measured presence. No calculation, no architecture, just a man moving toward something he needed to reach. He got to her and stopped. His hands came up and held her face, both thumbs pressing gently along her cheekbones, reading her like a document. "You're out," he said. His voice was doing something she'd never heard it do. "You got yourself out." "I broke a pallet," Faye said. Her voice was shaking now with the effort of holding something back. "And I hit someone with a piece of it. I didn't mean to hit him that hard, but my depth perception is terrible under stress, and I want that on the record." "It's on the record," Augustin said. "Also, the Q2 thing is a real conflict. I wasn't just saying that to Faye." His thumbs were still against her face. The gentleness of it, from hands she knew could do the opposite, made her eyes sting. "Stop talking for a moment." She stopped. Behind them, the controlled sounds of Edouard and the others entering the warehouse. She didn't look back. She looked at Augustin, and he looked at her. Not past her, not through her, not at some edited version of her. At her, at exactly her, like she was the only fixed point in a landscape that was otherwise always moving. "I knew you hadn't been inside long enough," he said quietly. Edouard said 30 minutes. I told him 15. I was wrong. Something moved through his face. I don't like being wrong about things that matter. I matter. The words came out smaller than she'd intended. Augustin Voss, who had run the most sophisticated criminal enterprise in Quebec for 14 years, who had never been recorded losing composure in any documented form, pulled her forward into his arms in the middle of a waterfront parking lot with the sounds of his crew dismantling Cassian Morel's operation 30 meters away. He held her like she was something he'd thought he might not get back. "Yes," he said, into her hair. "You matter." Faye stood there in the cold Montreal April and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, or possibly ever, the specific sensation of being enormous and also exactly the right size. Not despite her size, not in spite of anything. Just enough, more than enough, the exact amount. She pressed her face against the front of his jacket, which smelled like cold air and cedar, and a night that had almost gone differently, and she let herself cry a little bit because she'd earned it. "I still want the poutine," she said into his jacket. "I never got the poutine." He made a sound. She felt it more than heard it, low, rusty, slightly surprised. The sound of a man remembering something he'd thought he'd lost the habit of. He was laughing. Edouard, appearing in the doorway of the warehouse, stopped, stared, looked at the two of them, looked at Pierrot standing next to him, looked back. $400, Pierrot said quietly. "Not now," said Edouard, but he was hiding something at the corner of his mouth. It was raining by the time they got back to the city. Faye sat in the back of the SUV with a blanket someone had produced and a coffee that had appeared from somewhere, and Augustin sat next to her, not touching her but close enough that she was aware of every inch of the distance. He had his phone out, dispatching things in a voice that had gone back to its normal operating register. Low, precise, final. But every few minutes he glanced at her in a way that he probably thought was subtle. It was not subtle. "I'm not going to break," she said during a pause between calls. "I know. I'm also not going to quit." He looked at her directly. "I know that too." Faye pulled the blanket tighter. "I do want to know," she said. "Not all of it. I'm not asking for a full briefing, but I think I've been not knowing for 6 weeks now, and I think..." She stopped, reorganized. "I think I'd rather know enough to make an actual decision than keep making the decision by not making it." Augustin was quiet for a moment. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He reached over and took her hand, which was still holding the coffee, and held it, not dramatically, not with any statement to it, the way someone holds a hand when they've decided to, and aren't going to make a production of it. She let him. Outside, Montreal moved past in the rain. The neon of the plateau, the limestone of the old city, the bridge lights bouncing off the river. This city with its 2 languages and its long winters, and its extremely complicated relationship with law and mythology and what counted as belonging. Faye was from Scarborough. She had grown up understanding that belonging was something you built out of whatever was available, in whatever city let you, and that the shape of it never looked the way you expected. The office didn't change, but it changed. The men stopped being distant in the way of people deciding how to categorize her, and started being distant in the way of people who have categorized her and are fine with where she landed. Edouard held the elevator. Pierrot started leaving her the good coffee from the corner shop on Saint Laurent without being asked. Saint Jean, who still communicated primarily through silence, had left a pair of very good gloves on her desk after the warehouse night without any indication of where they'd come from, and she had put them on and not mentioned it to anyone. She still tripped over the threshold of the boardroom at least once a week. She still apologized to inanimate objects when she bumped into them, which the men had stopped finding bewildering and had started finding something they would never in their lives characterize as endearing, but which Edouard privately told Pierrot was consistent with her general pattern of being a specific type of person. Pierrot had agreed. "The type that doesn't look like trouble," he said. "The type that is trouble," Edouard corrected. "Just not for us." Faye reorganized 3 more of Augustin's subsidiary archives that year. She found 2 more discrepancies, one significant, one eye-watering, and in both cases the individual responsible was simply no longer present in the organization by the following Monday in a way she did not ask about. She also negotiated, by accident, a resolution to a long-standing territory dispute with a family from Laval by mishearing the nature of the meeting and preparing an extremely detailed operational compromise proposal that she presented in full before anyone had a chance to tell her she was in the wrong room. The Laval family had been so startled that they'd agreed to 3 of the 5 points before Augustin could intervene, and he'd told her afterward in the private voice he'd developed for conversations that were only for her, that she'd done in 40 minutes what 6 months of back-channeling had failed to achieve. "I didn't know it was a negotiation," she said. "I know," said Augustin. "That's why it worked." She thought about that for a long time. She thought about a lot of things, about what she'd decided and when, about the Tuesday mornings when her mother called and she could say honestly that she was good, that things were okay, that the job was steady, which was true in the way that the most important truths are true, which is to say that it contained the whole complicated real thing inside a word, simple enough to say out loud. She was good. Things were okay. The job was steady. And Augustin Voss, who had survived 14 years at the top of something that ate most people alive, who had built a world out of control and precision and the specific discipline of never wanting anything he couldn't afford to lose. Augustin